Okay, so it should be recording. Awesome. Hey, okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming to the meetup. I'm Renee. I am one of the organizers of the Pittsburgh WordPress meetup, and I just have a couple quick things to say. If you're new here, welcome. If you have been here before, welcome back. Happy to have you. We have a website at wppittsburgh.com, and just a few things on the website I want to point out. We're on Facebook. I don't Facebook, so somebody else in the group handles the Facebooking, but you know, if two of you are on Facebook, you can hang out and talk together. Twitter, we don't have a super active Twitter account, but if you're on Twitter, make sure you follow us. YouTube is where I will be posting this recording. And obviously, like you heard of this meetup through meetup.com, this is our meetup group. So just a little introduction. We do have next month's meetup scheduled. It's on Tuesday, May 12th at 6 o'clock. It's about Yoast SEO. So we do have a speaker from, I think, Colorado, and she's been using WordPress a long time. So if you want to RSVP to that, you can do so here, and that'll take you over to meetup.com. So later tonight, after the meetup is over and I've downloaded this recording, I will add a new blog post, and it'll look something like this. You can see this was our last month's speaker. We talked about building e-commerce sites, and so you'll have a link to the speaker, link to the slides, video of the meetup, and hey, if you want to speak, we'd be happy to have you. So just kind of keep that in mind too. And we just have a couple other things, a couple resources here that are really great. I had mentioned before that a lot of WordCamps are now online. So there is one that I want to give a shout out to because they are close by. 2020.kent.wordcamp.org. I have to admit people, sorry about that. So WordCamp Kent is coming up online at the end of May, so that's the end of next month. So that is, it's actually not very far, but you know, now that we're all just staying home, I would recommend this for sure. I think it's maybe 20 bucks or something. You can kind of read through these things, but I'm not sure if their call for speakers is still open, but the in-person event is great, and I can only assume the online event will be awesome as well. So that is that. I'm trying to think what else here. I think that is about it. So if anybody has any questions, I really want to admit Marty here. Hopefully that works. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to add to the chat. So there should be a chat down. If you hover over your Zoom window at the bottom, you should see an option that says chat. I already added a link, but I'll say, hey everyone, so you can kind of see maybe that chat will flash at the bottom. So if you have questions during, you know, feel free to put them in, or if somebody says something that you're like, oh, hey, and I know of something else, and you want to add that, that's great. So I will introduce Ben. He is our speaker tonight. He's going to tell us how to make some awesome sites. So Ben, if you want to share your screen now, I think you can. I don't know if I have to give it to you or if you just take it. So let's see.
Cool. Yeah, did you want me to pull up my presentation and all that good stuff?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, uno momento. Hello, everybody. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. I'm not sharing my face because, number one, I don't want to destroy my internet. But number two, I don't want to destroy your internet with this quarantine face right now. All right. So, ready to go? Share screen. Cool. And let's do it. Everyone see that?
Yep, but it's kind of cut off on the side. So unless your talk is titled ecurity,
nope.
Your name is N. Butler.
Well, that's stupid. Hang on. What about now? How's that look?
Good, yeah.
Good? See the whole screen?
Yes.
Cool. Great. Well, let's dive in, everybody. Renee, thanks for the opportunity. As you saw from the clickbaiting title, Security and Performance Lessons Learned from Multimillion-Dollar WordPress Shops. I'm your host, Ben Butler, the founder of Top Hat and a developer, a WordPress developer. Top Hat is a design and dev agency in Pittsburgh. We're a small 8-person team. My boy Benji, who you'll see to the middle row all the way to the right, he's on the chat. He's here. He's getting extra credit. and that's really cool. I'm going to give him some other shout outs. So get this, Top Hat, 2 developers, and we're both named Ben. It gets really confusing, and a lot of people use us interchangeably in our client communications. It's a fun time, and a lot of this is from our experience together. But as a design and dev shop, we have a pretty wide array of clients that we've worked with, some big names that you'll recognize, a lot of consumer paid goods and consumer packaged goods, especially craft beer and beer is in our portfolio right now. So if you hear me sipping on something, it's definitely some beer here, and I won't tell you how many I have on my desk right now. Another reason I didn't share my screen. But we manage WordPress shops, and we manage millions of dollars of revenue. These shops are doing millions of dollars in revenue a year. So the stakes are quite high. We're talking when there's a single second of downtime, a single minute of downtime, that's thousands of dollars. And so again, the stakes are high. And, we've learned a lot from doing so, especially this past year with the advent of Benji on our team. He and I have been working through a lot of things and backtracking and optimization, this relentless quest, as a result of fending off attackers from places like Russia, if you believe it. We were attacked by a DDoS attack this year, or actually late last year, from Russia, which is a whole different ball game. These sites, they serve thousands and thousands of people a day. And so performance for us is really scaled in very, very, very high numbers. And so, the intent today is to relay these in the most, simplified way possible. And so let's dive in. I want to make this a master's class in some principles, but, again, keep it approachable and, philosophically based, because you don't want to see a bunch of code on the screen right now. So let's dive right in with the first lesson that we've learned from all these crazy scaled sites with tons of revenue coming in and lots of people who want to see them go down. Lesson number 1, sites often launch haphazardly. This is a reality as a developer. The client says it's got to go live by insert your deadline here. And we do whatever it takes to do that. And this isn't just us as developers. This is site managers, marketing people. We do whatever it takes for the boss, for whenever the boss says it's got to go live. And then we do it, and then somebody comes in and says, well, let's change everything. And we do whatever it takes to do that as well. And really, whenever you're in this state of being where you're being crushed and oppressed by the deadline, it leads to a lot of inefficient coding. A lot of the work that we've been faced with is a result of telling clients, you know what, we can do it, but it's probably not going to be very efficient. We might have to go back to it because they have a deadline, they have a goal in mind, and we have to do it in a certain amount of time. And so things like your Ajax scripts, your PHP functions, they get bloated because we're trying to make it happen. We're trying to get the job done. This load from the client side, when they're pressed with content deadlines, this leads to bloated assets. These are gigantic image files. And just for reference, anything over 700 kilobytes for an image asset in my mind is absolutely colossal. But you'll see things, atrocities like 3 megabytes and beyond. And this also leads to some problems and some inefficiencies. You'll see CSS files that are just absolute nightmares. You'll see scripts that could be a lot better. And again, this is a necessity of what we do to hit deadlines. This also leads to plugin dependence. As a WordPress user group, this is probably the biggest thing that we should be preaching against, is to use safe plugin usage, to be efficient with our plugins, and to not be plugin dependent. Plugins are the Pandora's box, as I call them, of unknown challenges and issues. And we've seen some interesting things where, you really don't know what these plugins are going to do, not just with 1,000 users a month, but what about 1,000 users a day or more, 10,000, 100,000 users a day? What is a plugin going to do when it's faced? And you really don't know until you know, and it's too late. And really, the biggest thing that happens whenever we're developing and we have to get something out during the deadline as developers is we have this false sense of security on staging platforms where we use small groups to use and test the site, and it's nothing compared to the real world. And so we launch stuff with a false sense of security. And as you'll see, whenever we're talking about shops that are doing millions and millions of dollars a year, every single bit of efficiency and functionality and uptime matters. If you do the numbers with some of these shops, a 10-second period of somebody having downtime could equal thousands of dollars. And so these are all important to consider because these are real challenges that we face as developers. And these are things that we need to prepare for and to also prepare our companies and our clients and those that we're doing this for. So lesson 2 from these multi-million-dollar shops with a lot on the line is that things, they break in the blink of an eye. And I mean, it's ridiculous. And there's nothing like a site launch for everything to break. Again, we have this false sense of security. We tested on staging. Everything seems like it was done right. And then we launch a site and every single thing breaks. And I'm sure anybody who's developed, a site or two or more has experienced this. And again, the stakes are high for these shops. Or, the middle of the morning when you're making your coffee and you get that alert that the site's down. These things happen instantaneously. Or a new program or campaign launch. I'll tell you a little story. If anyone here banks with PNC, they launched their paycheck protection program. And the moment they launched it, the moment it went live at 2 a.m. on Saturday morning, this isn't on WordPress, obviously, but everybody and their grandmother was trying to get on to fill out the application. And the whole thing went down and the whole thing was buggy for 48 hours. And there's a lot of people in the business world who use PNC who won't be using PNC here in the near future. There's nothing like a launch or a new ad or something that's going to put the attention on a site that you're doing, and you should be so lucky that that is the case. But again, all of these things quickly add up and things go down before you know it. Or, the thing that we all dream about having to defend against and work with, a foreign or domestic attack. These are all things, again, that we can prevent, we can prepare for and be knowledgeful about. But the thing that, I really want to put out there is that as developers, we have to take responsibility because downtime is always somebody's fault. Sometimes it's been my fault. Sometimes it's been the fault of our hosting server, a management team that's working on a site. We have to take responsibility. Downtime will always be someone's fault. And so the only thing that we can do is make sure we're picking the right hosting equipment, that we're doing everything we can, that we're preparing the client to take maybe 2 or 3 extra weeks to get this to a state where it's scalable. And we're preparing the client or the organization that you work for. We're preparing the teams to use this in a safe way that's not going to lead to downtime in the future. Because downtime equals money. Again, I love the example of using multi-million-dollar shops because literally, again, 10 seconds could equal thousands and thousands of dollars. And that's a great way to put this in perspective. But beyond the lost revenue of those moments, we're losing future prospects and we're investing man hours to fix whatever the problem was. So regardless, downtime is going to equal money and troubleshooting from whomever is going to be working on it, but also the lost revenue as a result. And this affects every kind of company from, right now we're in this quarantine situation and websites are having more traffic than ever. And if you're relying on revenue from online for whatever it is, as a nonprofit getting donations, as a brewery who's trying to get to-go orders, downtime is going to equal money. And sometimes you never get it back. Lesson 3. So again, we're talking a lot about, when things break, it's really bad. And it is really, really bad. But it's even worse because when things break, they take a while to fix. And I want to put this in perspective because, again, I can't stress enough the ability of us as developers and the responsibility it is on us as developers to do the right things and to make sure that we have the time to do the right things and the resources, because when things break, it takes a long time to fix. And really, something broke because something's wrong. Again, it's always the result of someone or something, the server, poor coding practices, you name it. It broke because something is wrong. And it takes time and experimentation to figure out why. It takes going into the server logs and talking to the person who manages your server to figure out what was the thing that broke the camel's back. What was the moment that made it we couldn't come back from? What was that moment? And then we have to go and we have to figure out how to solve this. And of course, while you're trying to fix things, things might continue to break. And again, this downtime is equaling lost revenue, lost faith, and a lot of things that are happening. So the fact that it takes time to correct these things can also be a problem, because the problem is still there and it's still being fixed. And myself and Benji, again, who shout out to Benji on the call here, you know, there's been sites that do e-commerce that, you know, we've been trying to fix, and in the middle of fixing it, there was a problem so problematic that the entire server that it was living on went down, which obviously is an issue. These things, when you scale them up, these little tiny problems as the result of a single plugin. We recently took a very big and prominent site off of one plugin, and this one plugin has been the culprit for months and months and months. It was so inefficient, it was so problematic that it would bring down an entire server it was sitting on. And so when you have a site that's built on plugin dependence, you know, obviously it's going to take time to move it away. But again, it takes time, and things might break again as you're in the process of looking for the root. So really, you know, the main message here is you want to do it right the first time. You don't want to have to deal with lessons 1 through 3 here, or whatever, however many lessons we've been through already. So much fun. But you want to do it right the first time. And here's how we can do that. Here's the real lessons and the really actionable ones that we've learned from these sites that we're managing. Is number 1, and lesson 4 here, spend time and money on website hosting. You know, I've been a developer for the better part of a decade. I've been the founder and developer for Top Hat for 7 years. And, you know, even in the past year, I'm learning a lot about who I thought was the very best in the business for hosting. We have people like WP Engine that we think, oh, you know what? These guys are 100% bulletproof. They're the best in the game. And some of you might be sitting there saying, no, they're not. But for me, WP Engine was somebody that I thought was the greatest thing ever and never had any issues until recently. And, you know, the main message here is you really get what you pay for. We have clients, we have organizations that they have budget limitations. They have, you know, they have their own limits in that regard. And they also have the wrong idea about what hosting is. To them, it's just a line item on a budget. But to us, it is the very lifeblood of what we're doing as developers. And really, it matters. And it's just like anything in life. You get what you pay for. And so if you pick a $5 per month HostGator account, you can expect absolute garbage. And you can't expect to scale anything, because the downtime is going to be ridiculous. The load times are going to be even more ridiculous. You have to invest in an enterprise level solution and really just get in the practice of thinking about scalable quality environments. Something that we've been considering recently is moving a lot of things over to AWS, which is an infinitely scalable environment that can react, you know, immediately and scale up in real time as you need it. And so really the quality of these hosting environments that we're using is very important. The one thing that we really realized by managing multiple of these sites is that serious traffic has serious needs, and out-of-box plans hardly cut it. Really, the thing you want to do when you're dealing with a site that has anything near between 100 and 1,000 or more users a day, you have to be very transparent and open with the hosting provider that you're evaluating. You have to let them know. And some of the real greats in the business are going to be people that are going to ask you, how much traffic do you have a month? What kind of site do you have? What are the assets on that site? You have to be really open about your traffic needs, because not everyone out of the box, even like I said, I'm a big fan of WP Engine. Even for them, it can be a real struggle. And they don't really do a good job of saying, you know what? Yeah, it's going to be a struggle if you have 1,000 people a day on this very premium, very expensive plan. And so it's really important to understand that serious traffic is going to have serious needs. And again, even the very best hosts, their out-of-box solutions aren't going to cut it, and you're most likely going to need to quote custom plans. And that is our responsibility, again, as developers, to think about what we're dealing with and to do the proper precautions, to do all the research we can to figure out what's good. Ask about those SLAs. It's the magic phrase here, SLAs, service level agreements. And I'll give this to Benji here again, who's on the chat. If you're just joining us, he's awesome. He's all about these SLAs. And he introduced me really intently to these, and really we analyze these a lot closer now because of him. What happens when the shit hits the fan? What is your hosting provider going to do about it? What are they going to do? Are they going to respond immediately? What's their response time? The service level agreement could be the difference between you getting sued or fired by your client and you not. It's really important to understand what happens, again, when the shit hits the fan. What's their response time? What is their commitment to you? And what is the protocol that happens when something goes wrong? And again, these really premium hosting solutions don't really do a good job, because again, they want to do the bare minimum to make money. They're a for-profit business. They want to make money, which means they want to get you sold and they want to move on to the next person and get them sold. So it's up to you to ask these important questions and find somebody who answers those appropriately. Also ask about DDoS protection. This is something that a lot, again, these premium hosts that they charge you tons and tons and tons of money, they don't usually offer DDoS protection out of the box. They're going to upsell you to something else. And so they make themselves sound like the most secure and awesome environment available. But these are some of the things that they're not doing that they should be, in my opinion, out of the box for these premium price tags. And so you want to ask these questions. You want to figure out what the cost is going to be, or you want to figure out what it's going to take to get you up to speed in some of these categories. And also, again, care about your ability to scale. What happens if you're an overnight success? What happens if a huge publication runs a story about you, your client, or your organization, and tomorrow you have 10,000 people a minute on your site, or 10,000 people a day would be a little bit more reasonable? What happens? Does your, again, to the SLA, what is your hosting provider going to do? Are they going to shut your site down until that traffic goes away? Do you have a plan that's going to scale up with that traffic, and what does the billing look like for that? Really, it's important to understand what the ability to scale is, especially if you're dealing with a site or an organization that has the ability to scale, and to scale very rapidly and overnight. And so you absolutely have to consider this in your setup. And as I call City USA as of this presentation, shared servers can bring down everything. So if you have multiple things, shared servers, again, even on the very best of hosting providers who, will say that you're not going to have much downtime, shared servers can really disrupt your clients, your organizations, your businesses. And so it's important to realize that if you have a high-risk site, something that has a history of problems, that has a certain amount of traffic, that you need to invest the time and the resource into getting them away and getting them siloed. And I'm trying to remember, Benji, slack me the name of that one provider that we were talking to that silos everything. They're super, super expensive, but you want to look into these siloed providers that keep everything put away on their own, because shared servers can do so and can do some real damage. Pantheon, that's it. Thank you. Pantheon is one of these ultra premium solutions. They silo everything. Flywheel is another that offers siloed, but WP Engine, by and large, even if you have your own server, is going to be a shared server. And again, that can be a problem. Lesson 5. So we just talked about hosting. We just talked about the importance of that. And I would say that in my experience, that's the thing that I need to communicate the most to clients and organizations. And so, you know, as developers in these roles, you can expect that to be the biggest contention in terms of just pure budget. And it's absolutely critical to have that really solid hosting environment, that place that, again, can scale, that's ready to go. But you want to spend time and money on security, and that's lesson number 5. As you scale, so do the bad guys. And you might fantasize about fighting off Guccifer from Russia or somebody from Anonymous, but let me tell you something. It's not glorious. It's not fun. And when the client is texting you and saying, why is my site down and I'm losing money right now, it's really, really not fun. Benji can attest to this. When a site goes down, it's catastrophic. It's very uncomfortable. And so as you scale and as these sites scale, so do the bad guys. And some of these people bring down sites for fun. And as I mentioned, a lot of the hosting solutions that are a lot of money don't offer the things that are super important. And really, don't do this because it's illegal and the FBI will be at your house in a minute. But a distributed denial of service attack, a DDoS, is very, very easy to do. You could literally write a script in 5 minutes and put it on a page and open that page, and that page will automatically query somebody's site infinitely until the site goes down or they have some kind of protection. It's very easy to do, but it's also very easy to prevent in a lot of regards, but it's completely catastrophic. So the best thing you can do, and everybody can do this better, is to pass traffic through a proxy. Like I said, it's easy to do. We have Cloudflare, we have Security. WP Engine has Global Edge Security, as they call it, thus the little registered mark. But pass the traffic through a proxy. Again, it's a budget item. It can cost $10 to $50 a site. WP Engines is super expensive. So I recommend Cloudflare and Security, but it's really easy to do. It's another budget item, but you're going to weed out 99% of the issues. And sure, one might get through, but I'll tell you what, I'll take that 99% any day of the week. Mandate complex passwords. If you don't use a plugin solution or some kind of PHP snippet that you just put in the library of the sites that you build already, then you need to, because backend access can be an absolute catastrophe for a site. It can do damage that can almost never be undone if you're not using backups and other solutions. But even whenever you're backing up a site on the regular, if somebody gets unauthorized access to the backend, they can go in and they can go wipe out hours and hours and hours of orders. They can compromise information. If you're using a plugin like WooCommerce, they can get back in there. They can send a note to your customers through the native tools that live in there. I mean, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that can happen. And so you want to hedge your bets and you want to limit your risk by mandating complex passwords and using a solution to do that. Just really, again, to limit your risk and to make sure that you're keeping things as good as you can. Again, I'll take that 99% any day of the week. And if you're using a username called admin, stop right now, because that's 50% of a hacker's combination there. Once they get your username, it's home free from there. Lockdown login access by IP. This is something that, I think is a really interesting practice. WordPress, it allows us to do so many things. And one of the things you can do in the WP config is you can lock down login access by IP. You can do your office address, your company address. Back in the day, I used to have my hotspot on this. As you implement other practices, these things become, varietal and depending on the client and, what kind of history you have with this site from a security perspective, this may or may not be possible. or, you know, plausible to do. But if you're dealing with a site where there's a lot of vulnerabilities and attacks on the WP admin, this is something that I would recommend. Again, it's super easy to do. You can find tutorials online, but that's just one way, again, to weed out 99%. And I'll take 99% any day of the week. Lesson 6. Oh man, remember how I was talking about that haphazard coding and just trying to get the site out? You might think you're a great developer, but I'm going to tell you something. Even the best have a lot to learn and a lot to optimize and be efficient of. My boy Benji here from Top Hat, again, if you're joining us, my co-partner in development arms at Top Hat, he beats me up all day, every day, and I'm his boss, but he still beats me to death about the efficiency of my coding. And it doesn't matter. It could be a site that has 10 visitors a day, or it could be 10,000 visitors a day. He's always challenging me about the efficiency of my code, and I've been doing this a while. So efficiency in coding is really important. I just want to reiterate again, this is a WordPress user group. And what does WordPress get a bad rap for? It's the plugins. I'm telling you, man, be careful, beware of WordPress plugins. We had one of the biggest issues we've had in our company's history because of something that a plugin was doing that we weren't even really aware of. It took us 6 months to figure out that this thing and this plugin was the thing that was destroying the site and making it unusable. But the whole development of this site was based around this plugin. As I mentioned, some have unexpected performance and security flaws, and you have to be aware of that. And sometimes you don't know until you know, and that site goes down in the blink of an eye. Just beware, and anytime you can, build your own solutions. You can build them better, you can build them more secure, you can build them more efficient, and if you can, you should. Minimize them. Again, minimize these as much as possible. The thing you have to understand about plugins is they're built for the greatest common denominator. And those who are doing it for profit often are doing it haphazardly as well because they have bills to pay. And so you really, again, don't want to rely on plugins very much, if at all. But I will say that there are some things that don't make any sense for us developers to do. Sometimes they present too many complexities or functionalities that are, you know, again, too vulnerable for us to manage on our own. You know, if we're talking about e-commerce, we're talking WordPress, I'm going to say WooCommerce. WooCommerce is proven out of all the sites that we manage. We have many that are using WooCommerce. We've never had a single issue with a WooCommerce site. It's built fairly well, in my opinion. Nothing's built perfect. We haven't had any issues for sites that scale. We haven't had any vulnerabilities or attacks that have been exploited. You know, for contact forms, you have Gravity Forms, Contact Form 7. You know, these again are things that don't make sense for us to develop. But for everything else, like that slider, or, you know, you name some piece of rudimentary functionality, it's up to you to build that because it should be built by a person and not for the masses. Go for tailor-made websites. You know, again, I like to mention the mass market in terms of a lot of things that are available on WordPress. That's really one of the things that gets us in the most trouble is if you pre-buy a theme and try to fit your client or your organization in the box of whatever that theme is, what you have to realize is that theme that you bought is built for the mass market. It's built with more stuff in it than you'll ever probably need. And a lot of that stuff is not selectively used. It's not object orientated. Sometimes it's just there and completely inefficient. If you can, build a site from scratch. I really encourage you, if you've never done it before, it's going to be the greatest experience of your entire life. Go build your own WordPress theme from scratch. Go do it. And you'll see how much more efficient and how much more control you have of your sites and how many efficiencies and how much profit you can add to your development for clients. Code should be built for the masses. Okay, so I'm not talking about mass markets. I'm talking about your coding principles should be built for the case of, what happens if my site or my clients or my organization site is an overnight success? Is my jQuery, is my CSS, is my HTML, is my PHP functions, are they ready? Are they ready for the big time? Are they going to be able to withstand tons and tons of people? Is my hosting server going to be able to withstand thousands and thousands of people if it ever happened? And we should all be hoping that the sites that we're building can last the test of time and that can last this stress testing. And so the code that you're doing should be ridiculously and relentlessly efficient, even if it never sees the light of day. We want to get in the habit of being efficient coders, because the day that you need it, you'll know how to do it and you would have done it. So you should be doing it now. Beware the almighty Ajax request. I'm not sure what the level of developers and site managers on this meetup is right now. Ajax request is basically you can send data into the server or take data out of the server with jQuery and do it on a front-facing web page. But if you don't do it efficiently enough, you can bring down an entire server, because a lot of times, and almost 99.9% of times, Ajax requests are not cached. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you want to make sure that anytime you're doing anything to your server, making any requests, or that anybody who's using a site is doing it and sometimes doesn't know that they're overloading a site with requests, you want to make sure that your Ajax requests are extremely efficient, extremely, situational, I guess is the right word. You don't want these just hanging out there because they can be exploited. And if something's dynamic, think ahead. So, one of the coolest things I think we've done recently, and this is credited to Benji, is doing JSON payloads on page, where if we know that there is a variable product, and this is really how WooCommerce works too, it's presenting JSON payloads of the various options and variables of a product on page, so that if you have someone on your shop or your website and they say, you know what, I want to cycle through all 25 color variants and all 30 sizes, and I want to add my own logo, and I'm going to do this, that, and the other. Let's say that one user is making all these requests. If you haven't thought ahead about what are the variables that somebody could cycle through on this interface, they might accidentally make 200 server calls and multiply that by 10 people, 20 people. You could bring down your whole server by accident if you're not thinking ahead about what do I need to be dynamic and how can I present it. Again, I think displaying a JSON payload is one of the coolest things I've ever seen that Benji did, and made one site that was an issue and had performance issues due to Ajax requests, made it 1,000,000 times more efficient, and it's been operating a lot better ever since. So again, if something's dynamic, think ahead. Beware of the almighty SQL query. So they all overlap at this point, but one of the sites in question was using a very bloated SQL query. And again, this goes straight into the database. Boom. It was bloated. It took forever. And all it took was 100 users trying this one piece of functionality by accident. They had no idea, because they're just trying to make a purchase, man. They were using this functionality, and the whole site went down because SQL queries can be very taxing on the server. You got to be careful with these things, guys. Again, it might work for 10 people. It might work on your staging environment. But what happens when you scale this for the masses? You don't really know, but you should be thinking efficiently. And never use order by rand. Again, I don't know what the median level of coding here is, but WP Engine, I give them a lot of credit because they disable this by default, the order by rand property. Horrible, absolutely horrible on a server. It can do a lot of damage. I like to use JSON payloads now to mimic the functionality, because this is horrible on servers. And so lesson number 7, this is a very important one too. If you have an uncached site, you're in big trouble, my friend, because caching, if you're unfamiliar, it's going to store files on the user side, which means they won't request it again. If the same user is viewing the same product 9 million times, that's a bit of an exaggerated number, but I've had a few beers, so I apologize. But if one user is looking at one page quite a few times, they're not going to have to request those assets. Those assets now live on their side, which helps you a lot. And so, this is this is not scientific, but I would venture a guess that a site without caching is going to break 2 times faster. I would probably say 10 times faster, but it's going to break a lot faster. And some of the big culprits are these sites with tons and tons of traffic that are really weighing down the servers they live on because they're not being cached. Caching in 2020 is absolutely necessary to building anything that performs well and anything that isn't going to get destroyed by 1,000 users trying to access it unexpectedly. And caching can slow down malevolent forces too. Again, that same practice of storing files on somebody's end, it could be one of those really heavy requests that somebody is trying again. And in some environments and systems are caching PHP functions now as well. So if somebody is trying to intentionally do harm, caching is going to slow them down a bit. And it's another case for, security. And you don't really think of caching as, something for security, but it can be too, as well as performance. Really, it helps the server. I mean, that's a given by this point. It makes your website faster, which makes everybody happy. And the one thing that I would offer as a key takeaway is to take it one step up. A lot of plugins and a lot of server environments now can offer caching, but a lot more providers and third parties can offer a content delivery network. I would say this is really the next step. This is something that, I came across as I was preparing this, that I, see as an underutilized opportunity to make things even better. But basically, it's a worldwide system of proactive caching. It stores copies of your site at different servers all over the world. Again, it shortens the time. I know it's really weird to think about data traveling, but there is a distance that data has to travel through wires. And I know this is the cloud, but the cloud is still built on wires. It has to travel through those wires, and the closer it is to the person requesting it, the better off it can be. But again, this is really the king of caching. This is the ultimate step and a really good solution, both for performance, but again, for all of the reasons that we just mentioned. Lesson 8, this is really it, guys. This is the one. And again, I know we're faced with deadlines, we're faced with challenges, and we're trying to do the job, but really lesson number 8, minimalism. Minimalism is the guiding philosophy. Do everything possible to minimize database calls. And sometimes it's being creative and innovative, and sometimes it's taking 5, 10, 15 extra minutes to, instead of calling that one single dynamic field 10 times, calling it once and storing it as a database, or looping through that data once and storing it in an array and looping through it as many other times as you want once you've done that. Do whatever you can. It might sound silly and stupid. Maybe your site has 5 or 10 people a day. But again, what happens when you're faced with a job where you have to build something for a site that has 1 million people a month? What are you going to do? You have to start practicing these things, even if it feels silly and unnecessary. We just have to be doing these. It has to be built into the philosophy of how we're coding things. Again, minimize database calls. If you can store it in a variable, you should do it. If you can loop through an array once and store it in another array, that way you don't have to loop through that array again or do that query again, you should do that. Be creative, be innovative, and consolidate. This is a given. This is usually baked into caching, a lot of caching plugins and environments, but minimize that HTML, those scripts, the CSS, etc. The best plugin in the game, in my opinion, is WP Rocket. Not only is it customizable, but it offers you the ability to do all of these things without even thinking about it. Again, sometimes premium, proven, awesome plugins make a ton of sense. Sometimes it doesn't make sense for us to try to do these things all by our lonesome. And I would say caching and minimizing things like HTML and scripts and CSS, we shouldn't be trying to do that by ourselves. We should have automated platforms and plugins that are doing this. If you're on WP Engine, they're automatically doing a lot of these things for you, but they're now compatible with WP Rocket, so you can super stack that stuff. You can have WP Engine running, and you can have WP Rocket running, and it can be awesome. But you want to minimize your HTML, your scripts, and your CSS. Again, this idea of minimizing and minimalizing things again and again, and getting in the practice of being efficient with that is really key, because you want to be in the habit of these things already. Minimize asset file sizes. If you've ever uploaded an asset that was more than 700 kilobytes, you got to quit your job now. You got to go sit in the corner of shame, because this is huge. Every time somebody requests an asset, even in caching, it can be heavy for performance and these things. You have to minimize the asset file sizes. There are a million solutions. There are solutions you can bake right into the framework of the site you're building. Again, does it make sense for you to automatically, or does it make sense for you to manually do these things every single time? Maybe not, but there are tons of plugins that can help you do this, because maybe it's not you that's the problem. Maybe it's your marketing manager. Maybe it's your boss. Maybe it's the owner. Maybe it's the client. Maybe they don't care about optimizing files, and they upload an image that's 10 megabytes and is suddenly putting strain on the server, but also taking forever and ever and ever to load. We need to think ahead. Again, we got to be in the practice of being minimalist in our philosophies and the things that we're doing. Optimize those images. Use SVGs wherever possible. If it is a flat vector artwork file, if it's a logo that you have the AI to, get it as an SVG. Request SVGs wherever possible. Again, minimize asset file sizes. And for video, there's a ton of options to light load that stuff, and look into light loading solutions for videos. Look for hosting platforms that hold those videos for you. Wistia is a really great one. Why would you host that video file when you can have somebody else do that for you and optimize it and serve it for you? Pages should only call what they need to do what they do. Whenever I'm done building a site, and whenever I push a site out into the world and the client comes back to me and says, Ben, I have another page that I want you to develop, I'm creating a new style sheet. I'm creating a new template. And just as a rule of thumb, we're making sure that the scripts and the styles, by and large, are only adapting and being used on the pages that actually need it. The functions we're using are only being used for the pages that need it. You don't want to globally embed every single script that you're using on every single piece of the site unless it's needed on every single page. You want to be a minimalist with your coding principles, and you want to make sure that you're only calling what you need, when you need it, where you need it, and why you need it. So there you go, guys. Some lessons from the trenches, from the fires. I'll shut up now and field any questions that we've got.
Ben, do you want to stop sharing your screen, and then we can go back to gallery view? That way,
let's do it.
Yeah, perfect. Right. So I know a couple people have their video on. So I think there's 2 questions in the chat if you want to field those, or 1 question and 1 comment. So if you want to look at those too.
Sure. Oh man, you should see these private messages. Just kidding. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's a great note I see in the chat here, is to not over optimize your images. So yeah, that's an awesome note. Lossless compression is key. And really, as developers, we have to be using our best judgment. If something looks bad, it probably really does look bad. And we don't always have somebody telling us, hey, you know what, that looks like garbage. But yeah, lossless compression is the way to go. And I say, pretty much any image file that's 700 kilobytes or lower in file size can look really great and can scale really nicely. And if you have unique challenges where, you know that something you're building is going to be pulled up on a Jumbotron, maybe you need to invest in some kind of responsive solution that serves another file size. But for the average user, yeah, absolutely. Lossless compression being the keyword there. That's awesome. So Mason says, what do you prefer to use for accessibility validation? So Mason, help me out here. Do you mean accessibility as in the various things like helping with contrast and, people who have issues and offering those varieties of things?
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. For people, to be able to interact with your site, regardless if they have something going on. So they say it's like dyslexia
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really complex question that has a lot of layers. I would say that, for just straight up validating, the HTML validator is key. Various organizations have various levels, so there are tiers to accessibility. And so depending on who you're representing, working for, or depending on who your site is serving, there could be, a variety of layers. So we deal with a mental health organization, and they're all the way down to the accessibility, where the protocols, the notes are very, very dense in terms of what they need to accomplish. And so, it's really important to understand what legally your organization requires. But also, if you're doing contracts with clients, or you're doing freelance and all that stuff, it's very important to have a clause that says that the updates and accessibility are not going to be liable to you in 5 or 10 years. But it is very important to use accessibility validation, and to lean into the client, to ask them or the organization what legally they're obligated to do, because it varies.
Thank you for that.
Oh yeah. If you hear sipping, it's beer, guys.
So there's a lot
got...
about stripping out unneeded CSS. Any tools for stripping that out?
Oh boy. So, this is a really interesting topic as well. I would say if you're building the template, air quotes, the template yourself, if you're tailor coding a site, there shouldn't be any necessary CSS styles. If you're using a pre-made theme, it's going to be really hard to do that without breaking something. So I would recommend that you look into creating your own, frameworks and themes, and that way you have full control with that. Within that context specifically, you can literally use a variety of functions to say, hey, if it's this page template, and queue this style sheet or embed this style sheet, and you can do that. If you're using some kind of optimizing plugin, a plugin can help reduce the spaces and minify, but it's either it should be there or it shouldn't be there. And if I see you're using Bootstrap, Bootstrap does a lot of good things, and a lot of systems are built on that. Sometimes you don't need it all. Sometimes there are ways to quote unquote normalize. There's this minified string of code that you can embed into your style sheet that will normalize and do a lot of the things that Bootstrap tries to do. But again, I am such a minimalist these days, and I'm more of a minimalist every single day because of unnecessary CSS styles, and being as object orientated with the things that you're doing. The more you can do that, the better. So we see, let's see. Contact Form 7. Have you ever experienced any buggy issues with it before? So, any plugin you're going to have issues with. You're always going to have something that has some kind of bugs. The way that we use it, we haven't really seen any buggy issues. I would say the biggest problem I've had with Contact Form 7 is probably some of the reCAPTCHA stuff, where reCAPTCHA version 3 doesn't really work. That's so great with Contact Form 7. But really, Contact Form 7 is powerful. It's, very up to date. They're protecting you against a lot of things. It integrates with tons and tons of things. Like you mentioned, MailChimp and HubSpot. Yes, absolutely. It does that. It's awesome. But again, it depends on what the stack of plugins it's competing with is. So you want to, again, be a minimalist in terms of plugins and what you're using. But, again, everything could have some Contact Form 7. And I did see that Renee doesn't like Contact Form 7. Yeah, I feel you on that. Benji and I have a lot of discussions, not disputes, about Contact Form 7. I personally like it, but, there are better solutions for a lot of things. Like a simple contact form. Contact Form 7 is great. But guess what? Gravity Forms, it's a premium product. It's, paid for. It is way more complex. It can take payments. It can integrate with webhooks a lot better. So, Gravity forms for anything beyond a simple contact form, absolutely. Renee, that's genius. Nailed it. See what else we got here. Yeah, load CSS. That's a cool one too. Prevents flickering, I've seen. Caching helps that too. Let's see what else. Looks like all the questions we got so far. Keep them coming, guys. Renee, feel free to dive in too.
Yeah, I had a question about, you mentioned, being efficient and, writing your own stuff. I think, if you're first starting writing your own stuff, I don't know that you're going to be efficient, but how would one cultivate that efficiency? So like where, do you have any resources of what you would recommend? Also, like, how do you know if what you're doing is the best way to do it or not? Like, are there any references, any groups, any people that, can look over your stuff? Like, what do you recommend for, learning the best way to do something?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm pretty new to this group, candidly. I would hope there are some mentors. I know Benji from our team is a member of this group. He's a great resource to ask questions to about efficiency. I really think you need to pair yourself with a community of seasoned developers in the space, because you really need to interact with people. If you've not had a site that has served millions of people a year or even a month, or ridiculous volumes, if you've never experienced any downtime or hardships or foreign attacks or any of those kind of things, it's important to talk to people who do, and to share your code with mentors, and to have those intentional relationships, because they'll be able to say, yeah, right away, this is garbage and this needs fixed and this needs to be more efficient. And that's a really important relationship to have. These groups and the people in these groups are very important to one another for that very reason. And we should be holding each other accountable, because we don't just represent ourselves in an organization or organizations, we represent WordPress. And if we make a mistake and WordPress is the culprit, then people are going to say WordPress sucks, which it doesn't. It's awesome. So, I would say, like all things, if you've never developed your own site before, or you never developed your own framework or theme before, start with a tutorial. WP Beginner has tons. You can figure it out. Spend your off hours not working and not doing things. Spend your free time experimenting and iterating. Have mentors and people in the field fact check it and look at it. Have them beat you up. Have them challenge you. And, just continue iterating on that process and trying to think with object-orientated philosophies and minimalist perspectives. So by and large, if you have a template that's widely different than another one, you should be Googling the tutorial about how to enqueue style sheets for various templates. How can I take this one template over here that's going to have a 20,000 line style sheet? How can I enqueue this only to that? How can I have an environment where I can take scripts that only belong to that template and put it over there? So whatever that page needs is what it should have. And so, of course, you're going to have global things, but you just have to think about, what does this page need? And as you're going through and you're learning and you're going through these tutorials, you'll start coming up with the solutions. But I really do think the mentoring is very important, and to find somebody who's going to challenge you, find somebody who's better than you, find somebody who's more seasoned than you, and have them just beat the crap out of you on the stuff that you're doing. That's the only way to get better.
Good points. Anybody else have any other questions? I wanted to ask one about caching. You mentioned WP Rocket, and you mentioned, a premium host that already does some caching. Are there any other types of caching that you do other than those two things that you might do together?
Oh man, I think that's really, that paired with simplistic and minimalistic development principles, really, they can get you mostly there. It's really important to be using caching, period, and to also realize that certain things can't be cached. So the admin.php, if you're sending Ajax requests in there, that's something that's not being cached. So you can try to cache, as much as you possibly can do, but you also have to realize that, if you have a site that's completely bloated, that is unrealistic in terms of its size, that's, not really built in a way that's scalable, that caching can't help you. And also that there are certain things that you can't do. And so if you're not doing the basics, then caching isn't your savior. But if you are doing the basics, caching is going to only amplify what you're doing. And so, looking into the host again is super important. WP Engine, I love them for that reason, but there are plenty of others. Pantheon, Flywheel, AWS is great, and they have these solutions baked in. But WP Rocket paired with that can be really cool. So, I see a question about API calls. Hit me.
Yeah, so hi Ben, first of all, thank you for this amazing talk. My question about API calls is that I need to handle one of the website, and in this website I need to handle the content which is coming from an API, and content is updated like almost daily. Now my problem is I'm using this transient cache to handle the caching responses of the API. But the problem is the data from the API is like literally huge, like 20,000 posts or something. So I'm looking for a better caching strategy so that I don't end up doing too many API calls, and the users are not end up doing too many API calls, and the data is also available like time to time. I was considering making a scheduler, but maybe you can suggest me a better way to handle like tons of API calls.
Oh, yeah. Dude,
I
this
hope
is
it's a
awesome.
good question.
Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for asking that. So there's a lot there. And without seeing the exact code and what's required, I might be a little bit limited in some of the things that I say. So feel free to definitely follow up. I would say the first thing that I would look at is, and Benji and I just solved this problem for something, by and large, whenever you're querying an API, I would request it in a JSON format, number one. It's very efficient. And then number two, to develop and look into solutions that allow you to see when was data updated. So from those 20,000 posts or whatever that number is, I doubt that everything has new data. And if it does, you probably need to look at a very, very, very enterprise level server, because that is serious business right there.
I
But
would like to add something here.
Go
Sorry
ahead.
to interrupt. Not every 20,000 posts are updated like on a daily basis. I check out the JSON response. Like there's one parameter which is like last updated, or it's like an active or inactive. There are like two parameters. One is the last update date, and the second is active parameter, whether this is like active or not active. So I can ignore the inactive ones and use the updated response date time. And regarding the server, I'm already using complete AWS infrastructure and two EC2 servers, and already distributed to S3, CloudFront, and and Elasticsearch. So in this application, so servers, I'm handling it. My only problem is which caching strategy, or just the strategies is where I'm stuck right now.
Yeah,
it's an enterprise application I'm working on.
Can I just have maybe a comment or something to go along with that?
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things is, okay, so just to understand properly, you've got the API, and the API is, you've got it set up so that you can query only posts that are updated in a certain amount of time. Is that correct?
No, basically, this is an enterprise API coming from one of the client, or I can say, and I need to go all the data in one of their project. So it's like that. So the API is updated regularly. Basically the data, sorry, not the API. Data is updated regularly. So, and the website that is using the API, I need to keep that updated time to time. So that's how it is. So API setup is not handled by me. It's handled by another application, and another application of them gonna handle the data. I hope I'm clear.
So there's a parameter inside of the data that you're getting.
There are parameters for every, like, for example, you want to
say updated,
only
last updated, blah, blah, blah.
No. Like, even though I can say that get me only 10 entries, or get me offset of page 2 or page 3, that REST API will give me data accordingly.
Yeah, that sounds pretty standard for an API. What
I
what
mean,
we've
it's
been
something like
doing.
that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely a scheduler is pretty good for that, and you can always make the schedule, um, like, let's say you do a cron job and you find that it's like too slow, you can always change the amount of cron jobs you're doing in a period of time. Um, but yeah, if it's like, if you're attempting to update every single thing every single time, that's clearly going to be an overload.
I mean, I don't think that's possible as well to update every single time. Consider this as an example. Let's say this WP beginner website, right? So they have like different folds. Like one section is doing like recent posts. One section is showing most famous posts. So in this website, it's gonna be folds like this. Like one fold is calling like most recent post, last updated post from certain category, most commented post, something like that. So that's how the data is handled. So every fold is making a WP query to get all the data. So previously what I was doing is I was doing like a WP query every night, or maybe on the first page load, then caching in transient and expiring it in every 24 hours, like with a scheduler, like, and pre-filling the cache. That's what I was doing previously. But the problem that was happening is, so I was running this call every night, but there was some data that was updated during the day. And due to this, I had like non-working links or non-working data in this application. So that's where I was lagging. You understood my point, right?
Oh,
So I
interesting.
need to
It's
fill that
going
gap.
all the way through. Hmm.
So it's all handled in WordPress.
Yeah. And for everyone listening who's saying, whoa, what are these dudes talking about? This is about at the end of the
Enterprise.
spectrum of advanced level stuff here. And yeah, really interesting conversation. I would say from from a caching perspective, I right off the top of my head, I can't offer any life-saving solutions. I think you're off to, from what I can tell, a really, really solid start where you're looking for the data that's been updated and only updating that. I think what Benji was alluding to, we dealt with this on Shopify, where we were requesting inventory and products from Shopify, and Shopify has a parameter itself that says, we're going to give you only the data that's been updated in the last 15 minutes. So maybe it's going back to the API provider and saying, hey, do you have something that provides a more efficient response in JSON, maybe the last 15 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, sooner than that. So maybe turn it back on them. I think you're very quickly gonna run into some limitations here. And I mean, that's a lot of data. It's a very big solution, very big problem. So maybe go back and ask for a different output with some other parameters, or ask for something that can be tweaked a little bit from the API source itself.
Yeah, that's the problem. API source is actually quite old and quite limited, and I'm getting options to call via query categories and like normal REST API solution via category 10 post, page 2, page 3, and the standard ones, nothing
Yeah.
specific, and I have to deal with them. One idea that I considered was also to use a NoSQL database, like I don't know. In Amazon, there's one, I forgot the name, if you remember it. Uh, they have like pretty a simple NoSQL database which everyone uses. I forgot the name. Fuck. Sorry, whatever. So yeah, you can use that, and you can call that data via a GraphQL query, and you call that GraphQL query in your WordPress application to handle that data, and time to time just calling the data from REST API and loading it directly into this NoSQL database. So there's no load on WordPress database. There's an external database that's handling the content, and all I have to do is maybe via GraphQL interface or via a simple call to the database, I get the data into the application. So basically, the data is decoupled and handled uh, via Amazon's one hosted NoSQL database. That was
Yeah.
one idea I had.
Yeah. Definitely feel free. DM me your email. I'd love to, if you feel free
Yeah,
and feel comfortable to.
I would love to have a chat with about it. So
Yeah.
I can drop my mail here. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
So how do your name is Ben, right?
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Ben Butler.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
should be able to do it. Yeah, you can just send to him, like, and it'll say privately after it.
Yeah, sounds good.
yeah, and the last note I would offer on that, and then I'll dive into another question here. Maybe you have to build the API. Maybe you have to take the data and maybe you have to filter it on your own somewhere else. Maybe you have to build a modified string that is doing it on another server. That way you're not, breaking the actual application that you're working on. So maybe you have to build your own filtering on another server that does it, that you can then call. Maybe that's the solution, is to take it out, parse it out separately. So, but I would love to talk more. I'll
Yeah,
send you
let's
a
talk
DM.
about it. Yeah, sure. I sent you my WordPress Slack username on a private message.
Cool.
Perfect.
Thanks, man.
Thanks a
Fun
lot, man.
question. Yeah. And again, for those of you who said, "Whoa, what was that about?" You're absolutely right. That was some gnarly stuff. I'll tell you what. So appreciate to exercise my brain.
If anyone wants to discuss about enterprise solution and handling performance related problems, you can hit me up also. I can drop my Slack username publicly, so I don't mind on WordPress Slack. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
hit me up if anyone if you have any questions.
Cool.
That's the $1 million range right there. That's what it's all about. So, all right. So Mason, cool question here. What can you tell is an upsell and what's premium and not? So, oh man, this one's tough. I mean, nowadays the solutions that used to be free are the ones that you have to pay for. I remember way back in the day, Security had a really good out of box freemium offering. And nowadays, to get anything good out of them, you have to pay. I would stick to the road that is more traveled. I would stick to the proven enterprise solutions for things that you're going to pay for. So again, Cloudflare is a really great solution to filter traffic before it even hits your server. It's that before server interaction that can validate people. Security is the same thing. WordFence is fine-ish, but I think WordFence as a provider has a lot of flaws that I would recognize. The biggest being that WP Engine doesn't allow you to use it, so you can't actually use that plugin. But you can use Security. You can use other things like Cloudflare and all that stuff again. So really, I would stick with the things that are most premium and enterprise at that point, the things that are the most reviewed, the most utilized by people. So WP Rocket is a paid one. It's the best in the biz, and it's that way for a reason. And a lot of these you can get really reasonably priced licensing, like WP Rocket. You can pay like $100. I think it is $150 once, and you have an unlimited license for life or something, or it's like a year. So, again, you get what you pay for. And I think whenever you're dealing with firewall protection, when you're dealing with caching, you want to pay. You want to pay for those solutions because those are going to be the best. And again, stick to the road more traveled in that case.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So maybe one last question? Any other questions?
Make it juicy, guys.
I have one basic question.
Mm-hmm.
How would you handle the JavaScripts of Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager? Because anyhow they are like a performance hog, and they are like always marked on this pingdom test and others. How would you handle that? Would you handle them locally, or what would be your approach?
Man, that's a good question. You're right. They are hogs. I don't have a good answer for you at this moment. I think that the people that we deal with, they care more about the accuracy and, on my totem pole of things that I'm trying to minimize and optimize. That's probably one of the last things on my list at this point, just because I want that data to be accurate and I don't want to screw that up. There are ways, and I'm sure there are tutorials and people who have the answer to that. That's actually really intriguing, and that's something that I'm going to research after this. But I personally don't have a great solution or answer at this moment in time. But
Well,
man, I'm going to go get one now.
I have two questions about that. One, or a question and a comment. So one is, I know WP Rocket does something with Google Analytics. So I know you can turn that on. So whether that helps with something, I would think it does. Otherwise, why is it there? But my other question is, so are you just putting those scripts in somewhere, like you're not using a plugin so that users can see the analytics in the dashboard? Anybody?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't.
I'm just
get that.
wondering if you or Ben or anybody, like if you are to kind of keep things minimal, are you not using a plugin
Yes.
for Google Analytics to
Yeah.
keep it? Yeah.
So, I mean, if you ask about the scripts, I would say yes. If I'm not using any certain script, I would like to dequeue it. So basically, I build like a small function in a child theme and check what scripts are not getting used on certain page and just simply dequeue them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I do about the scripts. I can say that's.
Ben, what about you? Are you using a plugin? Are you how are you handling the Google Analytics on your sites? From a minimalist perspective.
Yeah, so we use a stripped down custom like base theme that has all the absolute bare necessities in it, and then we add all the other stuff because we only deal with custom sites.
Mm-hmm.
And within our custom top hat dashboard, we have a place where we can drop those scripts pretty easily. So we can simply drop the script there. And again, it's I don't fully buy into some of the recommendations, especially from Google, when Google says do these things and you have this page speed ranking, and rating. Pingdom is probably what I trust, and Google Analytics is the last thing that I try to optimize. But we just drop it right in the code because again, I don't want to screw that up. I don't want to have inaccurate data. I'm sure there are solutions and ways to make it better. Sometimes where I have, clients and organizations that just suck and they'll go in and they'll abuse, those abilities to drop stuff in the header or right above the footer. I will use a PHP file or I'll use some kind of function within the functions.php to pretty much hard code that analytics script in there. Cause again, we do SEO as well. And we want to make sure that data is unaffected because that's going to look bad on us. So we very atypically use plugins for Google Analytics, but, also recognizing that plugins can help you cache that. But again, I don't know that the juice is worth the squeeze for caching Google Analytics. There's, so many other things and there's literally everything else to, to go try to optimize before you get to that. And again, that's your bread and butter in terms of visitors and analytics. So I really don't want to mess with that stuff right now. And I don't have a solution that I'm comfortable with that I've tested that I can stand by at this point.
Thanks.
Holy technical guys. That was great.
So hopefully you all responded to the meetup tonight. So you should be able to see each other on meetup.com. If you wanted to follow up with somebody after the fact, you can just send them a message through Meetup. So just make sure that you have your Meetup messages on, if there's somebody that you wanted to follow up with. But I think that kind of wraps us up. I'm going to stop the recording now. And let's see.